Welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. This week, we're continuing our journey through the Enneagram and my picks for which characters match up with each of the 9 types, or rather, the 18 subtypes. If you need a general primer for what the Enneagram even is, that's covered in the first installment of this series, so go watch that. Before we dive into this week's types though, I do want to touch on one little thing. It should be obvious, but just in case it wasn't, there are no good types or bad types. They're all just different flavors of the human experience. After all, every type shows up once as another type's stress arrow and once as another type's growth arrow. Though there are certainly healthy and unhealthy examples of each type. And we as individuals may have our own preferences for certain types. I know there are a few that I'm far more comfortable dealing with than others. But hopefully I'm managing to mostly be fair to all the types in these videos, though I apologize if I fail on that end. I think type 3s and 8s in particular may have a rough time of it because it's easier to write villains who are driven by achievement or confrontation than some of the other motivations. With that out of the way, let's get back into it. With type 4, the individualist. The main drive of a type 4 is self-discovery and self-expression. They want to be themselves and not anybody else. Whether or not they are, they certainly feel unique from other humans. This can lead both to them being confident that they have special value to the world and convinced that they have special weaknesses. That is to say, they have a very holistic view of themselves and perhaps the most honest view of themselves of any of the types. Although many 4s retreat to privacy to preserve their self-image, they are not all introverts or shut-ins. The most prominent sin for type 4s is envy. For as much importance as they place on being individuals, it can be all too easy for them to evaluate themselves in comparison to others. They can look at other people's achievements and ask themselves why they couldn't do something outstanding like that. Why can't they be as unique as someone else? And sometimes, being unique leads to a lack of those comforting things that would be deemed normal. 4s experiencing stress will start to take on attributes of unhealthy type 2 helpers. Remember that type 2s are those most concerned with others, suppressing themselves and clinging to others. In many ways, this shift is a 4 behaving like their opposite. Conversely, 4s who are relaxed and experiencing growth behave like healthy type 1s. They stop wallowing so much in their self-perceptions and latch onto an ideal or principle. It's their personal beliefs that do make them individuals, and now they have the conviction to act on them. The first wing of an individualist is, surprise surprise, with type 3, the achiever, and it intuitively makes a lot of sense. These 4-wing 3s, also known as aristocrats, are inclined to prove their individuality by all the awesome stuff they do. This can help combat the general type 4 tendency to get mired in their own thoughts. This can backfire though, as focusing too much on these feats can risk the aristocrat feeling they've lost sight of or sacrificed their authentic self to get there. Getting back to Warcraft, there is one character that I believe is a prime example of a 4-wing 3. You see, this character was born with special eyes. Look with your special eyes. My brand. That's right, I'm of course speaking of Illidan Stormrage. During his test, my thoughts were, isn't afraid of pain, doesn't grieve his losses, and doesn't care too much about what others think of him. He's an outsider and is fine breaking the rules. Thinks highly of himself and is very ambitious. Thinks ahead. From his birth, he was marked for greatness with the rare golden eyes that only a few night elves like he and Ajara possessed. Though apparently that's now known to be an indicator for druidic potential. Despite this, Illidan would prove time and time again that his destiny was his own, and instead forged his own path. Even with that supposed potential, he never excelled at druidism like his brother Malfurion, even with Cenarius himself teaching them. Instead, he took to the use of magic, and became a capable mage serving under Kurtalos Ravencrest. His 3-wing would constantly crop up as well, and he would attempt to woo Tyrande with displays of magical prowess. His obsession with Tyrande also highlights his greatest show of the type 4 envy, as Malfurion had her affection in a way that Illidan never would. Perhaps he'd have had a shot if he weren't so extra, but he's such a 4 that would never happen. Though not exactly by his own choice, Illidan had his golden eyes burned out by Sargeras and replaced with spectral sight, serving as at least a symbolic rejection of what had been laid out for him at birth. Illidan went on to accomplish many tremendous feats thanks to his ambition. His plan to secure the demon soul was integral in closing the demonic portal. He took it upon himself to preserve 7 vials from the Well of Eternity so that they would be able to access the magical font in the future as well. For this, he was imprisoned, but shortly after his release 10,000 years later, he took it upon himself to absorb the skull of Gul'dan and defeat Tichondrius, an accomplishment aimed not only to hinder the Legion, but also to prove himself to Tyrande and his brother, though in that regard, he failed. Shortly after, he was enlisted by Kil'jaeden to destroy the Lich King, and it is here that we see Illidan behave like a 2 under stress, putting aside his own desires to serve someone else, and essentially working against his own primary goal of kneecapping the Legion. Illidan, of course, went about this task in the most unique and over-the-top way possible, by securing the Eye of Sargeras and using it to rumble the whole world, and in the process shattering the Frozen Throne, though he only manages to crack it before being stopped. After traveling to Outland, he does impair the Legion a bit by subduing Magtheridon, but upon being discovered by Kil'jaeden, immediately falls back into servitude by launching a more direct campaign to try to vanquish the Lich King. He then went a little megalomaniacal during the Burning Crusade, but ultimately continued to work towards the Legion's downfall. He is slain, but upon being revived in Legion, seems to develop into his best self, finally sticking fully to his conviction and not backing down from his enemies anymore. He of course does this in the most Illidan way possible, by leaving the portal to Argus open and bringing the fight directly to Legion headquarters. He rejects the gift that Zero tries to force on him, having learned never to trade his freedom for power, and stalwartly maintaining as a 4 Atu that his destiny is his own. And in the end, he makes arguably his biggest sacrifice yet by staying behind at the seat of the Pantheon to act as Sargeras' warden. For the vast majority of his life, I would say that Illidan was an extremely unhealthy 4-wing 3, but he really came into his own during the Legion expansion. The other individualist wing is with Type 5, the Investigator. 5s are moved by a drive for competency and understanding. They are often pragmatists. This easily melds with a 4's already existent tendency to always live within their own head. This very cerebral existence allows 4-wing 5s, or the Bohemians, to see things objectively without being clouded by their emotions. That does not mean they lack emotions, however. They are merely hidden beneath the surface. And this extreme emphasis on their internal world can leave 4-wing 5s feeling inert and nihilistic, and very often like nobody can truly understand them. A chillingly fitting example of a 4-wing 5 in WoW is Viranoth. My thoughts during her test were, she often feels misunderstood and alone, but doesn't do much to ameliorate it. Likes her privacy, but still craves connection. Wants what's best for her race. Somewhat pessimistic. Doesn't care for strict rules. Generally keeps her emotions in check. Viranoth has always been her authentic self, and is comfortable with that self. She rarely ever deviates very far from that. She does exhibit the cliché individualist tendency of being an introvert, living in her own isolated eyrie for many years, and only allowing in others when they are in need. She also quite literally retreats into her own world when Alexstrasza continually invites her toward the life of Ordered Dragons, because she feels her friend will never truly understand her point of view. Her 5-wing is quite clear, as she is calm, contemplative, and tactical. It is due to this cool and analytical nature of hers that she is able to essentially lead the front lines of the Primalists against the 5 aspects all on her own after Farok's defeat, as though Eridikron was involved, it was generally from way back in Harrow's Deep. She is not lacking in emotions, however, and takes the bait when Alexstrasza offers herself up as the prize in a one-on-one duel, when accepting it was clearly the riskier move. On the other hand, she is very clearly not a 4-wing 3, as she doesn't really have any great ambitions, content to live out a fairly modest life. It is only when exposed to others that need her help that she aims to achieve much at all, taking displaced drakes under her wing during the War of the Scaleborn, and taking the Netherwing and Storm Drakes under her wing in Dragonflight before herself becoming the aspect of Storms. Though she hides it well, Viranoth does envy Alexstrasza and other Ordered Dragons. Internally, she wished that she could have a mate and raise a clutch of her own, but Galakrond consumed her last mate and she hasn't been willing to take another. I find Virnoth to be a remarkably healthy 4-wing 5. She remains ever true to her beliefs, as a Type 1 would. Even when tempted by Alexstrasza, she never even entertains the idea of allowing herself to be ordered. And she furthermore does what she can to ensure that ordering is never forced upon any dragons, first getting Alex to vow it, and later taking up arms when she discovers the vow was not being honored. She has exhibited stress behaviors akin to a 2, though, particularly when she threw her lot in with the other incarnates. By doing so, she aided a force that in many other ways went against her ideals, with Iridikron being solely fixated on his hatred for the Titans, and Farak relishing in his destruction and seeking to set Azeroth ablaze. She ultimately recognizes this dissonance herself and severs her collaboration with them, correcting her own course. Next up, we have Type 5, the Investigator. Type 5s, if you recall, are those whose primary motivation is capability and knowledge. This leads to them being very efficient, and ideally for them, self-sufficient. They fear being incompetent at something, which can lead to them withdrawing and becoming mere observers until they've figured it out, and can safely enter the fray once more, though this may take far longer than they expect. Because of this behavior, 5s can come across as reserved or even devoid of emotion, but if they feel comfortable, then they can serve as wonderful repositories of information. 5's trademark sin is greed, though perhaps stinginess is a more apt description. Every asset that a 5 has is precious to them, including their time and energy. 5s understand the cost of failure, and that any resources that they spend on something, they are unlikely to get back, and so investments are done sparingly and judiciously. Better to not waste time on something than to waste an hour, week, or even years on it and having to start over when it doesn't pan out. But the greed can manifest in more direct ways, such as an insatiable need to know everything, often for the same reasons. 5s facing disintegration will act like unhealthy 7s, the enthusiasts, indulging in a myriad of pursuits and hobbies to keep themselves occupied and distracted from their stressors, not giving any of them proper attention. When growing, however, they behave more like healthy 8s, the challengers, confidently utilizing their vast and deep skill set to decisively and actively lead others toward the best results. The first wing of investigators, as if they haven't already figured it out, you clever 5s, is with Type 4 individualists. The 4-wing provides them with a sense of imagination and emotionality that can temper the pure logic of investigators. 5-wing 4s, or iconoclasts, are very hard workers if the work is of great personal interest to them. Otherwise, they may be unwilling to invest themselves. They also refuse to be another sheep in the flock that blindly accepts established beliefs. They need to question it themselves to verify its validity. Our example of a 5-wing 4 iconoclast will be Medivh. My thoughts during his test were, due to his powers and heritage, he feels like quite the outsider and tends to lean into that, though he recognizes that as a flaw and tries to overcome it from time to time. He has valued friendships and a connection with Garona, can be defiant if he doesn't agree, distrusts organizations. Medivh was dealt an unfortunate hand in life, being in large part possessed by the Dark Titan Sargeras from the moment of his conception. As a result of this malignant influence always darkening his thoughts, Medivh was always inside his own head. He was also an immensely intelligent and inquisitive person, as would be expected of the Guardian of Tirisfal. This is evidenced by his massive Guardians library, which contained thousands of books and outshone even the Kirin Tor's archives. And though advantaged by his inherited powers, he was nonetheless an extremely skilled mage. I dare say only Ajara and his mother Egwene actually eclipse him in that regard. Another trait he seemed to inherit from Egwene was a severe mistrust of the Council of Tirisfal, and any other group that might seek to manipulate his powers for their own political agendas. True to his 4-wing, he would not submit to their prescribed beliefs and be their puppet. He was determined to do things his own way, and though ever influenced by Sargeras, he likewise tried, as best he could, to resist him as well. Keeping the council at a distance, he only ever found himself respecting and keeping one apprentice, Khadgar. Medivh kept few friends in general, only those he felt he could put lots of trust in and whom he respected. Khadgar, his butler Moros, King Lane Rin, and Anduin Lothar. He also connected with Garona Half-Orcan, who he felt could relate to him, giving her any information she desired despite knowing she was a spy, and demanding she be showed respect, the two of them at some point becoming lovers. His reclusiveness, excessive pursuit of knowledge, and unwillingness to spend time on most people can be considered expressions of his Type 5 greed. Due in no small part to his condition, Medivh was quite an unhealthy 5. Rather than confiding in anyone about what he was going through, he tried to manage it on his own, and distract himself with lesser matters, as a Type 7 might. And if you want to treat Hearthstone lore as accurate, which you definitely shouldn't, he threw some absolutely raging parties. Once he was slain by his friends and subsequently revived by Egwene, albeit in a temporary state, he was free to grow towards a Type 8. He took his experience and great wisdom and determinedly worked to counteract the Legion's invasion during Warcraft 3, seeking out any authorities who would heed his warnings and guiding them to Kalimdor, where they would be able to unite and make a final stand to slay Archimonde and his forces. It is a shame that Medivh never had a fair shot at this growth while alive, but perhaps all the experience and trials he endured were what actually led to this growth in this liberated state. Type 5's other wing is with Type 6, the Loyalists, who are called thus because of their devotion to friends and deep adherence to their own beliefs. Contrary to 5-wing 4s, they are a bit less focused on themselves and more willing to coordinate with others. They are extremely analytical, being good decision makers even during crisis, and wish to be recognized as such. Thus, they are known as the problem solvers. However, this need to always make the right call can lead to them being evasive, withdrawn, and defensive if they aren't absolutely certain. I found that Iridikron the Stone-Scaled fit as an example of the 5-wing 6 problem solver. While testing him, my thoughts were, he is patient and extremely analytical, making plans and contingencies for any situation. His emotions seldom surface, but they are there. He doesn't care what others think about him. He is consumed by a fixation on what he hates, isn't joyful and doesn't aim to be, dislikes order yet exercises firm leadership. Indeed, Iridikron is practically defined by his immense patience, allowing him to make tactically advantageous decisions, all moving him closer to his ultimate goal of thwarting the Titans. Despite his great and simmering hatred, he never allows his emotions to cloud his judgment as a 5-wing 4 might. His 6-wing allows him to better work with others, as seen by his ability to command an entire army of primalists, to keep the headstrong Farak and Raszageth reined in, and even to politely invite Viranoth into the fold. It also allows him to be remarkably dedicated to his stance that the Titans suck, and that they stain anything they touch. However, his Type 5 greed is absurdly easy to see. He is extremely reluctant to change course, as doing so risks all of the effort he had already sunk into the plan. Only when faced with greater risk is he willing to deviate, as when Viranoth demanded that he allow her to duel Alexstrasza. He couldn't gamble losing her support. Furthermore, despite leading the Primalists in their war for something like 200 years, he never really took to the battlefield personally, unwilling to endanger the greatest resource of all, himself. Iridikron strikes me as being a Type 5 of middling health. He rarely moves towards a Type 7's sporadic tendencies, even under stress, but arguably has on at least 2 pivotal occasions. Following Viranoth's capture, he resorted to trying to create more incarnates out of his subordinates with the greatest potential, but none had what it took to survive the ritual, and he ultimately squandered his best remaining assets. And after he and his fellow incarnates were freed by Raszageth, he again threw away his closest allies, allowing Farak to succumb to his own destructive tendencies and alienating Viranoth by collaborating with the Void. Iridikron generally does quite well at growing towards an 8, leading the Primalists in very efficient and effective ways with an assured calmness about him. And now we move on to Type 6, the Loyalist. What most motivates a Type 6 is devotion, both to those important to them and what they believe in. They can make for some of the best friends, as they are unlikely to abandon you, and in fact, may serve as your staunchest allies. Although they may be supportive of authority they approve of, they can be fierce rebels against anything that opposes their values. Though every Enneagram type has its own fears, fear as a whole is the defining sin of 6s. They are always conscientious of what could go wrong and act accordingly. A big part of why they show such fierce loyalty is that they themselves fear being abandoned. They do not want to inflict the same emotional harm that they themselves worry about. It can also simply be prudent. If they treat others well, others are more likely to act in kind. 6s crave security, often lacking the confidence that they will be able to face the world on their own. The support of friends and family, societal structures, and even their own convictions can all serve as a great source of comfort to them. When it comes to growth, you may recall that 6s exist on their own separate triangle alongside 3s and 9s. In the case of 6s, stress manifests in unhealthy type 3 achiever-like behaviors. They attempt to assuage their anxieties by being especially productive. The more they do, the more prepared they'll be when disaster strikes. They may become aloof and competitive, feeling that by being beyond reproach, they'll be safe. An integrated 6 acts like a healthy 9 peacemaker. They become more hopeful and at ease with everything, casting aside their fear that the world is out to get them and allowing them to act without excessive upfront analysis. The first wing of 6s we'll be exploring is with the Type 5 investigator. This adds a propensity towards thought and competence to the preoccupations of a 6. Their more complete understanding of the world makes them work hard to protect the people and values that they hold so dear to them, and earns them the title of the Defender. Of course, the flip side of this takes the form of overthinking, believing that the powers that be have more power and control than may actually be true. To me, a clear example of a Defender is Sylvanas Windrunner. Now, you may protest that she isn't loyal because she abandoned the Horde and served the jailer, while saying she will never serve, but I would remind you that Sylvanas has been many characters over the years, depending on who's writing her. My view of her is defined foremost by everything preceding BFA, and my thoughts during the test were prepared, perfectionist, but does things her own way, doesn't care much about what others think of her, thinks highly of herself, interested in improving herself, but not necessarily morally, loyal to those she cares about and to her ideals. Sylvanas is, in my opinion, fiercely loyal to those she cares about. She is, of course, plagued by her fear of loss. She lost her parents, Larissa and Varith Windrunner, at the start of the Second War, and her brother Lyrith shortly thereafter. She thought her sister Alaria lost beyond the Dark Portal for some time as well. And of course, she lost everything during the Third War, where countless Quel'Dorei that she fought tooth and nail to protect ultimately fell to the Scourge, herself included. And the loss didn't end there, as she had her freedom stripped away from her to serve as Arthas's minion. Little wonder that she should cling tightly to what still remains in her life. You can see this with Nathanos, whom she trusts more than anyone else, and who she saw fit to bestow with a sturdier and stronger body, akin to her own, at the cost of his cousin Stefan's life. For a time following her death, Sylvanas became quite disillusioned with the value of her own life, and of those of her people. Her quest for vengeance drove her down the stress path towards the actions of a 3, fixating on the solitary accomplishment of slaying Arthas. Following the vision she received after flinging herself from Icecrown Citadel, she saw the grim fate that awaited her if she died, and the dismal future her people would face were she not there to defend them from Garrosh's abuse. It was at this point that she started to grow and seek a more prosperous future for the Forsaken. Garrosh aside, she began to act a little bit more like a 9, and living more harmoniously with the other races of the Horde, even bantering with them from time to time. Of course, she always maintained her edge. She is Sylvanas, after all. New Forsaken that were raised were always given a choice if they wanted to continue their new existence, as free will was the ultimate tenet that Sylvanas would always be loyal to. She had been denied it, and none of her people would be denied it. She was also open to rekindling her relationship with her sister Varissa during war crimes, where the two of them bonded over their attempt to assassinate Garrosh. Sylvanas even invited her sister to join her as a Forsaken, albeit neglecting to mention that she would need to die for this to happen. Of course, she didn't take it too well when Varissa noped out of the situation. Quote-unquote losing her sister like this was too much for Sylvanas to bear, and at the start of Legion, she was even able to work in tandem with Varian in combat and utilized her precious Valkyr to save the Horde from annihilation. Vol'jin's death cinematic made it truly feel like she was being set up to grow beyond what she thought herself capable of, and come to love and trust the entire Horde. but we know the direction Blizzard ultimately went with. The last glimpse of her growth before burn it happens is during the Three Sisters story, where she suspends her plan to kill and raise her two sisters once Varisa apologizes for abandoning her. Overall, I'd have to say that she's a wildly unhealthy 6, but she was definitely making progress. Before the burn it! And of course, her 5-wing is constantly on display. She's always thinking, always planning, and often scheming. I don't have many specifics to point to here, as it's her whole personality, but I believe it's best on display in The Frozen Throne, simply because the story lacked the constraints of an MMORPG. Upon regaining her free will, she immediately set about trying to kill Arthas, then driving the Dreadlords out of Lordaeron and founding the Forsaken Nation. By comparison, she has fewer Type 7 traits than every other type. Speaking of Type 7 enthusiasts, they are the other possible wing of Loyalists. This wing brings an optimism, exuberance, and penchant for extroversion that can offset a lot of Type 6's darker thoughts. That being said, the fear of betrayal and abandonment is still there, and as the 7 wing brings a heightened aversion to pain, it stings all the worse when it does happen. Still, a 6-wing 7 is a trustworthy and joyous companion, and for that reason, they are known as the Buddy. Upon seeing his results and the moniker associated with a 6-wing 7, I immediately started grinning, because this man, King Rastakhan, would absolutely be your buddy. While taking the test for him, my thoughts were a bit mired in the past and complacent with the status quo, yet at the same time quite personally active in his rule. Very concerned with the security of his empire, thinks of the future, but is also a bit reckless. Having served as king of the Zandalari for over 200 years, Rastakhan has demonstrated a great loyalty to his people and their prosperity, as well as the Loa that they honor in a symbiotic relationship, and he will do whatever is necessary to protect them. As expected, he has a deep fear of losing them. He is grateful enough to the Horde for rescuing his daughter that he allows them to stay and fostered relations with them, though adds that, "If she comes to harm, know that I will burn your Horde to ash, and turn that pitiful collection of rowboats you call a fleet to floating debris. Good luck." He fought ardently to free Razan from Zul's lackeys who were attempting to drain the Loa. When Razan did fall to their enemies, he sought an avenue to assure his people's safety through Bwan Samdi. And when the Alliance sacked Dazar Alor, he fought to the death to protect the kingdom. Of course, the deal with Bwan Samdi should be seen as one of his failings, as it bound not only him, but all of his descendants to the Loa of Death, regardless of what they may desire. When stressed, Rastakhan would regress towards an unhealthy 3, relying on his feats of strength and boisterousness to demonstrate his value and keep those close to him in line, asserting to General Jakrazet that while he is king, the law is whatever he says it is, or telling the Prophet Zul that he needs to clean up the mess that he created. Both of them ultimately betrayed Rastakhan, probably having dealt with this behavior for years now. When relaxed, Rastakhan would grow towards a healthy 9, such as with his willingness to cooperate with adventurers to stop Hakar in Vanilla, and to work with the Horde in BFA, as well as his generally positive relations with most of the Loa of Zandalar. Though headstrong, the king was shrewd enough to survive over 46 assassination attempts over the course of his reign, including one from his then wife, so he is by no means devoid of 5 tendencies. But his 7-wing is simply stronger. He is optimistic about how things will go for the kingdom, disregarding Zul's prophecies about the Cataclysm and underestimating the plots against him during BFA. He relishes his life, openly stating that it is good to be king. And though a bit complacent, he does love taking to the battlefield, especially when hunting alongside his patron Loa, Razan, who he described as an enthusiastic predator. Although he is a blatantly flawed character, which I adore him for, I think that on the whole, Rastakhan is a mostly healthy buddy. That wraps up all of the types we're covering this week. Again, I encourage you to discover your own Enneagram type as well. You can use a multitude of free online tests, like the Truity test that I used for these videos, and use them to help narrow things down for you. Remember, the tests aren't perfect, and what you truly want is to find the type whose descriptions most aptly resonate with you. For this week's drawing, I had to go with our 5-wing 6 problem solver, Iridikron. And I think most players can agree that he's actually being handled fairly well, even though he does have that generic booming deep Warcraft villain voice. Yes, he does always seem to have a plan and be one step ahead, but that's due to his personality. He's quite literally a strategist that comes up with a bunch of contingencies. I think the sheer fact that he recognizes that he could fail if he isn't careful is what keeps players from souring on him, and I'm very excited to see where his story leads, probably in The Last Titan. And I decided to draw him in Wintergrasp just cause that seems like the general area where Harrow's Deep would have been located. And I already drew Virnoth in Icecrown. Though yes, I appreciate the irony of depicting him right next to a bunch of Titan architecture and facilities. But you know, things probably changed since he was sealed away. Please don't ruin him, Blizzard. He's actually really cool. But that'll do it for this video, so thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week for our final installment with types 7 through 9. Bye-bye!